Hi, hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Emmy and I'm a storyteller, witch, and final girl. I'm sorry, I'm still getting used to how I sit here. I never sit in this chair, so what a treat for you. This is Memento Mori Monday, where I talk about death, dying, grief, history, or kind of cultural death traditions. It'll run the whole gamut. And yeah, I'm going to answer your questions, putting things in context. If you have any kind of preconceived notions that you're looking to get disrupted by me, by all means, I welcome them. If you want to get your question, query, idea featured, or topic featured, please send it to the email that I will put on the screen, Movie Magic. And you could also DM me on Instagram, another great way to find me. Fun fact, today's question is coming from the previous video, so another great way to get your question featured. Quick disclaimer, the information in this video is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. Content related to death doula practices, end-of-life care, or any related topics does not constitute legal, medical, or professional advice. So I am a death doula, but I'm not your death doula unless we work together. So please consult a licensed professional for anything specific related to your situation. And of course, if you need any references, I will do my best to offer them to you for your appropriate situation. So let's dive into our topic. How often is there someone who doesn't grieve as long as others, or doesn't seem sad, and people bother them about that too? And I did ask for clarification. What do you mean by doesn't grieve as long as others? Do you find that you personally are not grieving as much as you're perceiving other people are, or what feels like a shorter window of time, or that other people seem to be grieving more briefly? Is it like an inward feeling of, I just feel like I don't grieve the same way? Or is it more, I feel like I don't really know what to make of other people? So they said, yeah, the shorter window of time. I feel people judging grief. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, which absolutely, when it comes to death, dying, grieving, we will find a way to project onto other people what we think is the right way. So I really, really value this question. I'm glad that you posed it, because I feel like we tend to talk about the grieving for a long period of time a lot, to the point where we have, a complicated grief disorder in the DSM. I'll link that too for folks who are like, what even is that? It is a real thing. If it's considered maladaptive enough, then you'll probably fulfill a requirement for something in the DSM. So do with that what you will. I do think that there are a few reasons on both ends, like the internal experience of I'm not grieving enough as other people, or I'm grieving more quickly than other people. And then there's a perception of other people as far as projecting on, you don't seem to be grieving the way that I thought you would, or feels appropriate for, a timeline or timetable. So I'll begin with the inward part of it. You have to consider that everybody will process differently. If there has been a certain kind of buildup to it, you may have already had the anticipatory grief experience of knowing that they're going to die at some point soon. It's been happening, it's been coming. Maybe they've been in and out of the hospital for a period of time. There's a certain degree of already having gone through the experience of letting go. You're already letting go of who you knew them to be, or you're letting go at that point of what you expect them to be able to do. If they were previously very active and were always going, now they're suddenly inside all the time, and they need aids because the disability has progressed to a certain point, then yeah, you've had a certain grief cycle already. So to a certain extent, there might even be you can get over it more easily. And I want to put out there too that everyone's grief will look different. So maybe it isn't even so much that you're grieving less than other people. Maybe it's that you're not necessarily sad and that your life isn't necessarily the same kind of disrupted as other people may find as a result of a loss. You know, there could be that layer of it too. That's what we grief people, people who work in death care, you know, helping people navigate loss. It's so complicated. Like, on one hand, we love Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her 5 stages of grief, but the downside of it is that we end up in this quandary where, as I noted, you have people who are grieving too much because they should have gone through all of that already. And then we have people who are not grieving enough because maybe they didn't perform the grief well enough. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, they should have had the denial. They should have had the anger. They should have had the bargaining and the sadness and whatever else is baked into that whole paradigm. It's still baked enough into the public consciousness that when people don't grieve enough, we put that on them as a problem that they have. That there's something wrong with them, they're doing it wrong. No, they're not. they're really not. Everyone's grief journey is going to be different. I think too, as I've noted in a few other occasions, that death will not end a relationship, it'll transform it. Every culture has, to some extent, their own ancestral practices that resonate with them. So when it comes to our personal grief, and if we have ancestral practices to some extent that can kind of ground us, then yes, there is going to be the processing of the loss of them in their physical form. But, you know, if you maintain an altar, then you're maintaining that altar. If you engage in any of the various ancestral holidays, like there's Parentalia that'll be coming up in February. That's a Roman festival of honoring our ancestors, our parents. And we have Day of the Dead, we have All Souls Day, we have Samhain, we have countless benchmarks all throughout our calendar year. And then we have the kind of cultural touch points that are also tied to the seasons as far as that goes. Like, you know, it's cold. With me being a Midwesterner, it's cold in October, November. There is that letting go, the dying of the crops, the leaves are falling. It's a good time to kind of get meditative and to kind of anchor yourself into these practices. So I feel like if you have that baked into you, if you already talk to your ancestors in some way, then that could in many ways alleviate it. I do think that grief ritual in general can help you to navigate the loss in a very embodied way. You know, physically, like doing something kind of takes the edge off and helps your mind body connect with that you're not going to see them anymore. So that comes to mind for me on the personal level. On the outward level, if you're seeing somebody who you think might not be grieving enough, first of all, you can't even begin to know what they're experiencing. There's like a whole wealth of things. Plenty of people will never shed a tear for the people that they've lost. It doesn't mean that they didn't love them. Plenty of people loved their mother, their parent, and they may not feel like they're in a great place to ever talk about it, in part because their relationship with their mom when they were alive was never something they really talked to anybody about. So how do you jump from never having talked about your mom at all to, okay, now everybody wants to know everything you ever thought about your mom all at one time? That's really overwhelming. That's a lot to ask of somebody, especially if you're concerned that they're not grieving enough. Like, which one is it at that point? So I would kind of impress upon you is, what are we really doing here? What are we expecting of people? And, you know, someone's internal journey is really going to be ongoing. Like, for instance, like maybe they're not reacting enough. If you can hear that, I'm so sorry. My radiator decided to chime in. If you're looking at somebody and you're kind of worried, I would ask you to consider too that depending on certain benchmarks of time, like in the coming years or decades even, that they may go through a cycle when they're realizing that where they are now is mirroring where their parent was at any stage of life, whether it's like, oh, I wonder what my mom thought when I was a teenager. I wonder how that really, really felt for her. I wonder how she would be addressing my son at this age, considering how I was at that age. That may change things up too. I myself am looking at my life differently at my parents, where they are older and they are navigating life a little bit differently. And I'm realizing like, oh, at my age, my mom had me and I was a few years old. I wonder how she felt at that point. Other than I know she was stressed out with her still being around, I'm able to ask her that question. But to those that have lost the people that they love, that is no longer available to them. As I noted, if you do have an ancestral practice, you can see if you can still gain that kind of knowledge from them. You can do an exercise where thinking about how your parent may have interacted with something or another elder or somebody that you cared about that passed away. That could be a good way to kind of nurture that relationship that has since changed, transformed, to say, I wonder how they would be approaching this problem. I wonder how they would have spoken to my nephew or to my child or what have you. Would they have great wisdom to offer them? Would they also have maybe like effed it up a little bit? Who knows? But kind of spending time there, having that curiosity can keep you synced up. And I do wonder how much of people who don't seem to be grieving the same way already kind of do that to some extent, that they have that wondering about what do they have done and holding them in their heart throughout the day. And if they've already been distant to some extent, then the change is going to be a little bit different. So you're going to handle it differently. There was a certain perception that I received that I wasn't grieving enough for my grandmother who had passed away. But that was a complicated situation. I lost my grandmother on my dad's side in the middle of the week. And then as we were getting ready for her funeral, my grandfather died on my mom's side. So these things happen. You know, you don't know when it would it have been more convenient and nicer and more spacious for me emotionally if it had all been spread out? Yeah. Did that happen? No, it didn't. And it meant that I had these competing feelings and I am dealing with them on different timelines as a result, you know, for a few different reasons, in part because they happened at the same time. I feel like a lot of people did misperceive me as like not having grieved enough when that happened. I was also the family death doula for both sides of the family as that was going on. So it was less of I did not grieve enough and I did not have like the appropriate time to do whatever it might have been. I've had a lot of time to, you know, allow myself to take up space and to process what happened in their own separate, unique ways. So everyone's situation is going to be different, and you're not going to know until you either talk to them or if you take a beat and consider that their situation is very personal and it may be very private. And who are we to feel entitled to other people's grief experiences? And who are we to be entitled to the performance of their grief in a certain way? Like, on one hand, I guess it could be concerning that maybe you're like, oh, they don't seem to be crying. Maybe they're withholding in some way. But at the same time, wouldn't you feel relieved that they're not bawling on the ground without you around? Ideally, we all need to be there for each other at the end of the day. I do think that part of what can help people grieve better is being in community. Like, we may hurt in isolation, but we heal when we're together. So I do wonder if that's like the other aspect of being able to maybe grieve more efficiently. Like, there's no great way to say that, or grieve more quickly than other people, or as you perceive other people to be grieving. I would say that that's probably the best other thing that comes to that's perhaps the other aspect that I think could be a factor in grieving more quickly. It's that if you do have proper support systems around you, if you have therapy, if you have a death doula that you work with yourself, or another grief coach, or even a grief group, you know, not everything is for everybody. And I think you should really find what works best for you. But have found overall that the people who are able to not feel completely dysregulated by their grief for as long as maybe others might. Again, perception is so subjective. I would say that that comes down to they had ancestral practices, they had community, they talk openly with their partner about their feelings in general anyway. So it's less of like, it ends up being a little bit less of a disruption. And I do think too, again, it'll vary from person to person and loss to loss. If something is anticipatory and something is a complete surprise, you may react differently, even if historically you do tend to maybe process a bit more efficiently than other people. So yeah, that's what I have to offer today for right now. I could yap more, but it'll be too long. If you do have any follow-up questions around what I commented on today, what I spoke to in this video, please do let me know in the comments down below. And again, I will throw the email back up for those of you that would like to submit an entry that's either related to what I talked about or completely unrelated. And I do want to name too that part of the work that I do as a death doula is that it's not strictly about the loss of life kind of grief. We can often deal with the loss of identity, and that's what we're going to be talking about in next week's video. Otherwise, thank you all so much for making it to the end of this video, and like and subscribe, do all of those things. And yeah, if you want to talk more, interested in working with me in any capacity, you know where to look down below. And yeah, please do let me know if you yourself have experience being on that other side of the spectrum where perhaps you're not grieving enough and that it feels like you're getting a lot of projection on you as a result. I'd love to kind of hold you and support you through that as best I can in this medium. But yeah, you have a wonderful day and Happy New Year. It'll be the new year when y'all are watching this. So, I am wishing you all the best and, health to you and your family. Bye-bye.